Assalamu alaikum students. Today's lecture is based on the second part of post-structuralism, and we will discuss major themes or major and significant theoretical practices of this particular movement. Number one is post-structuralists hold that the concept of self as a singular and coherent entity is a fictional construct. It is not a real construction, it is not a natural construction. Rather, it is based on some fictional ideas. Instead, an individual comprises conflicting tensions and knowledge, claims, gender, class, profession. So, for this reason, to properly study any text, a reader must understand how the work is related to his or her own personal concept of self. In fact, the self perception, the self understanding, the self comprehension plays a very vital role in the interpretation of meaning, in the creation of meaning. So, different thinkers views this way in a different way, and most of the times it is said that if gender is different, it will give you different meaning. Class wise the individuals are different, so the meanings will be changed. Profession wise the individuals are changed, so easily directly the meanings will be changed. Number two is the meaning the author intended is secondary to the meaning the reader perceives. No singular meaning is of the text. As you know that this is the main point of post-structuralism, that singularity and centrality of the meaning is impossible. That is not at all fall in this category. Post-structuralism denounces the idea of literary text having a single purpose, and you may quote over here the scheme of making the structures by Saussure, that according to him, meaning is constructed by an individual from a signifier. What is meaning? Meaning is basically a signified. This is a concept, this is an idea. But signifier, that is a word, a spoken word, it can be different from its meaning. So according to this is why we can say that signified is there to slide under the signifier and explains a talk about the primacy of the signifier. Although the intimacy between signified and signified is very much important, but post-structuralism says that signifier speaks or conveys something else, whereas the signified, the meaning can be different according to the class, gender, and profession. Third point is critic must use a variety of perspectives to create a multifaceted interpretation of a text, even if these interpretations conflict with each other. For a critical understanding, for a pure sight of the text, critics have introduced different and multidimensional interpretations. Although, according to them, many interpretations or any interpretation can be at a conflict with any other. What is important and significant in this regard? The important thing is to know how meanings of a text shift in relation to certain variables, usually involving the identity of the reader. If the identity of the reader is involved in the text and you are not taking author as a central fixed figure or central fixation, then the meaning according to the reader would be different. Here you may quote the concept of death of the author essay by Roland Barthes. It was published in 1968, and it announces the death of the author, which is a rhetorical way of asserting the independence of the literary text and its immunity to the possibility of being unified or limited by any notion of what the author might have intended or crafted into the work. When you are talking about the involvement of the reader completely in the text, it means that you are talking about the death of the author. So the idea which the author took into his mind while creating that particular work or while crafting that particular work, that was only limited to his mind. And instead we can say the essay makes a declaration of radical textual independence What is that independence? The independence is the work is not determined by intention or context. This is the spirit of post-structuralism, that the work is not determined by the intention of the author, by the context like history or societal norms or literatures. Rather, the text is free by its very nature of all such restraints. When you are taking the text free from all such restraints, you are majorly falling into the category of post structuralism. Number 2 point is destabilized meaning. When we talk about the death of the author and birth of the reader, it means that we are destabilizing meaning, we are decentering the meaning. So, post structuralist reader replaces the author as the primary subject of inquiry, which is called destabilizing a decentering. You may also say that the idea has great effect on text. It means that uh, when the author is decentered, you are not taking author as a central fixed figure, or you are decentering him while creating the authority as well as monopoly of the reader for reading text, for creating meaning, for getting particular aspects. It means you are going to destabilize meaning. The meaning or the intention or the perspective which were present in the mind of the author, now all these things are finished. All these things have a sort of stop short over here. And only the meanings which the reader is creating, which the reader are getting, that is important. Within a central fixation on author, post-structuralists examine the other sources for meaning like readers, cultural norms, and other literatures. These sources, readers, cultural norms, and literatures, are alternative and don't have authoritative nature, hence promise no consistency. As you know that readers, cultural norms, and other literatures are most of the times biased. They are biased because one literature is written in the favor of one country, definitely and naturally it will be against another country. So all these things are biased. So these sources are alternative. These are not authoritative. When these are not authoritative, it means the post structuralism, the movement or the system or the structure which is being followed by all these things in post structuralism, that is non consistent. It is not at all consistent in its true spirit and nature. Third point is deconstruction. Deconstruction basically was introduced by Derrida. It was Derrida's theory to read text against text itself. And according to him, there is nothing outside text. What you perceived in structuralism, that there is everything present outside, because for understanding a true signifier you have to understand the larger structure of which that particular thing is the part. But now the things are contrary, the things are opposite. Now Derrida says that there is nothing outside text, everything is present within the text. Barbara Johnson defines deconstruction is not synonymous to destruction but much closer to the word analysis, which means to undo. Deconstruction of a text does not proceed by random doubt or arbitrary subversion, but by careful teasing out of warring forces of signification within the text. According to Barbara Johnson, deconstruction does not at all mean to destroy all the previous norms, to destroy all the previous rules, regulations, or structures. Rather, it is there to get the proper and constructive parts of the previous things and previous structures, and then to introduce some new things, to reconstruct from the old things a new thing. That is called deconstruction. So, what is Derrida's view? Derrida says that a deconstructive reading at a must always aim at a certain relationship, unperceived by the writer, between what he commands and what he does not command, of the patterns of language that he uses. It makes the not seen accessible to sight. In his most famous book of grammatology, which is the base of deconstruction, he has given us the idea of deconstructive reading, that there is a difference between the commanding of the writer as well as not commanding of the writer. That there are some things which are being commanded by the writer, and in the same way there are many things which are not at all commanded by the writer. Theory of binary opposition in structuralism, which generated deconstruction. So the concept of pairing opposites gave us the idea of deconstruction. In fact, that things are getting value by having their opposite. In this regard, you may quote the examples of day and night, male and female, just to understand the proper value. Post-structuralism rejects the general notion and dominant relation of hierarchy. The deconstruction has two different prefixes, D, destruction, and con, construction. When these two prefixes are being jotted together, being bound together, then the word deconstruction came into being, which means that you are demolishing some surplus things, some outdated things, and you are reconstructing some new things. That's why the theory is named as deconstruction. In the reference of deconstruction, you may quote the example of Dylan Thomas' poem, A Refusal to Mourn the Death by Fire of a Child in London, which gives us the line, after the first death, there is no other. A deconstructionist view will give us the idea that since there is the first death, there is the implication that there will be another. But the poet contradicts in this way and says that there is no other. Deconstructionist stresses that this shows discontinuity in the line. This discontinuity, in fact, points out that the language has a slipperiness which makes precise interpretation impossible. Meaning are equally in the hands of the reader and the author. Author is creating some another meaning, whereas reader is getting something different so far as meanings are concerned. Next point is meta language. General practices are being discussed so far as post structure is concerned. So meta language is another part. Barth's work, Elements of Semiology, which was published in 1967, explains the concept of meta language. What is meta language? Meta language is a systemized way of talking about concepts like meaning and grammar beyond the constraints of a traditional language. Language basically is a systematic way of speaking or creating meaning. But when you are not talking about, or you are not involving traditional language in a meta language, then it will give you different sorts of symbols. And you may say that a systemized way of talking about concepts like meaning and grammar beyond the constraints of a traditional language. In a meta language, symbols replace words and phrases. What is required? The replacement of symbols and phrases. Meta language is required for one explanation of first order language, another may be required. When we talk about meta language, it means that if first order language is required for getting any explanation or interpretation, it means there might be another language which will be required in the future. So meta languages may actually replace first order languages. Barth also exposes how this structuralist system is regressive. Orders of language rely upon a meta language by which it is explained, and therefore deconstruction itself is in danger of becoming a meta language. And for all this, exposing all languages and discourse to scrutiny. So Barth is one of the major writers who can be cited and highlighted or referenced time and again so far as meta language is concerned. Who are the important writers? First of all, we will talk about Jacques Derrida. As you know that he is a French philosopher, critic, and writer. He is considered to be the founder of deconstruction, who denounces the singularity of meaning for the first time in history. His important work, Structure, Sign, and Play, in the Discourse of Human Sciences, which was published in 1966 or presented in Johns Hopkins University. Uh, According to Derrida and his paper, Derrida sees in modern times a particular intellectual event which constitutes a radical break from past ways of thought, loosely associating this break with the philosophy of Nietzsche and Heidegger and the psychoanalysis of Freud. The event concerns the decentering of our intellectual universe. Keep this thing in your mind, students, that decentering of our intellectual universe is the basic concept from which Derrida got the idea of deconstruction. Before this event, the existence of a norm or center in all things was taken for granted. Thus, man as a Renaissance slogan had it was the measure of all other things in the universe. For example, we may explain this concept, this decentering of our intellectual universe and the idea of this event and its exploitation in the example: white Western norms of dress, behavior, architecture, intellectual outlook, and so on provided a firm center against which deviations, aberrations, variations could be detected and identified as other and marginal. Take this thing in your mind, please, that the dress, coat, behavior, architecture, intellectual outlook, and everything related to the white Western norms of society, they were on the one hand, and when they were based on some deviations, aberrations, variations, which were detected or identified, all those deviations, aberrations, variations which were identified due to some other culture, they were considered as the other. They were marginalized. And in 20th century, these centers were destroyed or eroded. What were the centers? Deviations, aberrations, variations, which were identified as other and marginal. These things were destroyed. And sometimes this was caused by historical events. For example, we may quote the example of First World War. First World War destroyed the illusion of steady and material progress, or the way the Holocaust destroyed the notion of Europe as the source and center of human civilization. Sometimes it happened because of scientific discoveries. First, we gave the example from the history. Example of First World War and Holocaust. These are the examples which were related to the steady material progress and human civilization. So, civilization was also shattered and the material progress due to World War was also destroyed. These were the two examples of decentering the idea of progress and human civilization. Now we are giving the third example, which is related to scientific discoveries. For example, the way the notion of relativity destroyed the ideas of time and space as fixed and central absolutes. First, scientific discoveries were considered to be the idea of fixation related to time and space as the central absolutes. But when the idea of relativity was presented by the scientists, then this idea of time and space as fixed and central absolutes destroyed. Another example is that it was caused by intellectual or artistic revolutions in the movement of modernism. First, we gave the examples of history, then science, and now the artistic as well as intellectual revolutions which came into modernism. The arts in the first 30 years of the century rejected such central absolutes as harmony in music, chronological sequence in narrative, and the representation of visual world in art. Everything was rejected, changed, destroyed, renovated just because of the introduction as well as induction of or implementation or implication of the movement of modernism. Got the idea? So, what was the result of all these changes, all these destructions? We can say that in the resulting universe, there are no absolutes or fixed points. So that the universe we live in is decentered or inherently relativistic. Instead of movement or deviation from a known center, all we have is free play, or play as the title of the essay has it. For example, we can say structure, sign, and play in the discourse of human sciences. You know that we are concerned here with Derrida's theory of deconstruction and his major role for presenting deconstruction. In the lecture, Derrida embraces this decentered universe of free play as liberating. Just as Barthes in Death of the Author celebrates the demise of the author as ushering in an era of joyous freedom. So Barthes' presentation of Death of the Author and Derrida's presentation of the paper Structure, Sign and Play in the Discourse of Human Sciences are the major sources of deconstruction. What was the consequence? The consequences of this view, this new decentered universe, are impossible to predict. But we can say that we can try not to be among those who turn their eyes away in the face of the as yet unnameable, which is proclaiming itself as only movement for the sake of movement. But we can also get the result that this powerful quasi-religious appeal to us not to turn our eyes away from the light is typical of the often apocalyptic tone of post-structuralist writing. Afterwards, Derrida's deconstruction basically gave us the idea of logocentrism, that he says a structure which guides, but that center is not analyzed in order to analyze the center. For example, we can say that there is always a center which is assumed, which guides that structure, but that center is not analyzed. Only keep one thing in your mind, that center is not analyzed. We are analyzing only that particular structure with the basis of center. But when we want to analyze center, we have to assume another center. Another center would need be assumed. Then this is called logocentrism. The next point of is phonocentrism. Speech is privileged over writing because speech is original, but writing is not. Hierarchically, or hierarchy is not permanent or absolute. That we are saying that speech is better, writing is not better. We are here following binary opposition, as well as the phones, the sounds, the voices which are coming to our mind, and which generated phonocentrism. It means that speech are the voices or the sounds which are coming to our ears. These are the purer form of that particular idea, whereas when they are in the written form, these written forms are not considered to be the pure form. Then he gave the idea of center and meaning. Center and meaning, which we have discussed earlier, that for analyzing structure we need a center, and while being on center we are getting some other meaning. But when we will decenter it, for example, we are replacing the author, and we are introducing reader only and only the final entity, then meaning will be different. Final important point, which is deconstruction into five or six major concepts are concerned, is difference. It is based on differ and differ. Differ generates difference and differ generates differential. When these two things are going to be analyzed in a text in any entity, then it will be able to generate difference. Next writer is Roland Barthes. According to him, language is transparent and natural. He viewed that structuralism is not the end but can be explained further to lead towards conflicting positions. Death of the author and birth of the reader is also the major work of Roland Barthes, and we have discussed it in detail in the previous slides. He attributed an influence to Nietzsche's God is dead. When he says that God is dead, it means this was the idea, this was the basic thing through which Roland Barthes got the idea of the death of the author. That after creating something, the author is dead. because now the creation is in the hands of another central figure, that is reader. When God is dead, it means that the creation, the universe is there to create meaning or to have different sorts of understandings or interpretations with the help of its agents. Who are the agents? The man, the human beings. Image, music, and text was also one of the crucial essays of Roland Barthes, and through which Barthes gave the idea of structure in creating language.